Warning. Listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome back to Influencers Radio today. Today this episode really makes me excited because this is one of those episodes that I know can apply to every single person that's listening right now. Now, I'm not a big betting man, but I would not hesitate to bet that every single person listening right now is, to some degree, in a stage of their life, in the stage of a circumstance, whether it is work, whether it is personal, whether it is business, that this will apply to. You may think it may be in a trivial stage. You may think it's in a something's about to give stage. And I would encourage you to listen to what our guests are going to be talking about today, because it can have a huge impact on your life, regardless of what the circumstance is, because they are the authors of the book, and the title says it all. It's The Landing That Counts. Today, my guests are Margo Micallef and Warren Broad. What I really love about this book, and what I love about the content, is not just that it's great content and practical, tactical information for folks, and we're going to get into that, but the diverse backgrounds that you came from that really speaks volumes to the fact that this, both personal, business, work, how the same principles apply, and how the same things can work on our stress and our emotions. Margo, I know that you come from a background of the business world, and I'm not just talking about a business world. I'm talking about you have some pretty big qualifications behind you. You've done some really remarkable things, and you actually buy businesses. You buy businesses that are in hardship, they're distressed, and work through those obstacles, work through those perceived obstacles even that they have, and you bring those businesses back to success with your company, your Oliver Capital Partners. Tell me just a little bit about how you do that when you build up a business that has problems, and you're able to troubleshoot and see those problems to bring a business and turn it around.
So we like to say that we buy businesses with hair on them. And obviously the inference there is that the hair is in all the wrong places. So we see a way out of the crisis or adversity that the company is in. And sometimes it's very modest. Sometimes, they've just run out of capital and they can't grow. Or sometimes the entrepreneur that founded them is unable to take them to the next level, and they need somebody with more experience to take the business over. And sometimes they have real crises. Sometimes there's a shareholder dispute that's going on that is preventing the company from moving forward. Or there's been a lawsuit that is threatening to take the business under, and the shareholders would lose all of their value. So it can vary, to a degree as to what the problem is. But usually what we do is we see our way out of the problem, and we will buy the business, and we actually make it not just get it back on track, but we make it bigger and better than it was.
And so the important thing I hear you say there is crisis. The common thread is a business in crisis, that the current situation, the folks that are currently in charge are paralyzed, polarized. Something is not allowing that business to flourish or become what it could become potentially. And there's a crisis to overcome that they just aren't doing it, and you're able to go in and overcome that crisis.
Exactly right.
So on the other side, but which is so remarkably parallel, Warren, you're more on the personal issues. You are a clinical hypnotherapist, and you have specialized in addictions. You're addiction specialist, also with folks with compulsive behavior. And when we get right down to it, it's the same thing. People that are paralyzed, polarized, and in crisis that you help them get through.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Jack. The most of the time when I first meet an individual, it's when they've hit some sort of bottom. They've reached a point in their life where their existing strategies for managing their life or managing their issues are no longer serving them or are serving them very poorly. So my job at that point is to politely point that out and begin a process of rebuilding, and also having the individual recognize what those issues are and become very aware of them so that they can now make the changes that are required to rebuild themselves in a very similar way to Margo does with businesses. I do with the individual of rebuilding that individual and building them into what they ideally want rather than what circumstances may have created in them at the point that they meet me.
And I think that right there is what I want to talk about, put a spotlight on, because it really is the important point of your book. It's the landing that counts, finding peace, happiness, and prosperity when your life falls apart. And whether it's in business, whether it's personal, you talked about those circumstances. It really is. The circumstances is something that it's life, right? You have a great quote from Mike Tyson. It says, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." And I think that is so appropriate for where people find themselves, whether it's in business or life. They plan their business, they plan their relationships, and when things don't go according to plan, sometimes people get off track to a point where they think they can't get back on track, or they go into crisis mode. And the fact is, whether things went as planned or not, just like the title of the book, it's the landing that counts. Let me find out, what is it that you can help folks with? What is it that the book helps folks understand that we're in there? They're in that crisis mode, because a lot of time when people are in crisis, they don't think straight. They're making decisions that they probably wouldn't make otherwise, so they're making poor decisions. Let's start when people realize and understand that they're in crisis mode, whether it's business or personal. What can you let them know that they're not alone? It's not a unique situation, that there is some light at the end of the tunnel if they just take the time to assess and kind of regroup.
What happens when we go through a crisis is we feel a series of emotions, including fear, confusion, isolation, shame. Shame is a big one, blaming. So there's others as well, but it's those sorts of emotions that we feel. And I think the biggest thing is that we feel alone, we feel isolated, we feel that we can't talk to anyone because nobody will understand, and we feel so afraid and so shameful that we don't know how to move forward. And both Warren and I have had personal experiences with adversity and with crisis in our personal life, and we've both gotten through them. And what we do in the book is we actually talk about our own experience so that we share very, very openly our own personal experience so that the reader understands they are not alone. And the reader also understands that we understand. So we understand what the reader is going through because we've been there and we've shared those feelings and we've had those very same feelings. And then we show the reader what they need to do, which is exactly what we did, to work their way through that, what we call free fall, and land safely and land well. And what we teach in the process is not to be afraid, to stop being afraid, stop being confused, stop feeling ashamed, because you're going to get through this, and we show you how to do that.
Now, so let's look at some practical examples so we can put a face to this, right? If someone in business, and I'll throw some things out there that I've seen people that they think are insurmountable problems that, when someone else can take a different look at, that there really is an answer, but so many people, like you said, it's that shame, it's that isolation, that nobody understands this. I'm the only one that's gone through this. This problem is unique to me. It won't understand. So someone that's in a business, if something has happened, whether it's a big client pulls out that the business it's a foundation of the business, and they're in that mode. I know one of the first things that people do that it seems natural is they want to find out who's at fault. They want to assign blame. They think that that's something that needs to be done before they can move past that and get to work to come up with a solution. How important is that they find someone to blame, whether it's themselves or others, in order to get past that?
Well, I actually think that it's counterproductive to blame anybody, but we go through that. And I think the reason why we go into a blaming situation is because we want to try to understand what happened. And if we can neatly package it and say, well, it wasn't my fault, it was his fault, or it was, I did something bad, and therefore if I don't do that bad thing again, I'll never have to go through this. So, we blame as a means of trying to understand, but it doesn't really help us. It's actually counterproductive, and Warren could speak quite effectively on this at the individual level. But what happens is we get stuck when we blame, and it doesn't help us move through the other emotions that we're feeling, and it doesn't help us move to the other side. I mean, Warren, why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with blame?
Well, there's an interesting point that was brought up just before as well, that these common emotions, blame and shame and guilt and frustration, on an individual level and definitely in business as well, we see this as a reoccurring theme all the time. But when the individual is experiencing it, they think it is unique to them. So the shame that an individual feels, whether it's related to a business decision or a business failing, or whether it's on a more personal or family level, the shame that they begin to feel, or the guilt, or whatever prominent negative emotion that comes to the front, is not unique. And this is what's very important for the world to know and our readers to know, is that they're not alone, and that in fact these common emotions that they are experiencing and going through are quite universal. Even though the particulars of an individual's life and situation is unique, the associated emotions that they go through are not. And that's what makes a book like this and many others so useful, is that I don't need to necessarily know each person's individual story in and out and every aspect of it, because we all know that the fallout of it is going to be within these main categories.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting point. I want to go back to the quote that you use as a reference, which I think beautifully references the core principles of this book. The Mike Tyson quote: "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." How many people, because when people are starting businesses, when they're going into relationships, they create a plan, and sometimes they get attached to that plan, and how many people do you see that remain attached to that plan and try to stay on course with that plan, even though it's become apparent that that's not the best way, for them to be able to shift? Is that one of the things that the book kind of opens up for folks, is to open up a light that your plan doesn't necessarily need to be the way that you get to the outcome that you initially, put together to achieve, that even if you get to it a different way, that you are still, it's the landing, it's how you landed there that really matters, to give them the ability to shift and maybe adjust that plan that they initially set course on?
Yeah, we don't talk so much about the plan per se, but we talk about the ensuing feelings and situation when things don't go according to plan. So whether it's your business or whether it's your personal relationship, or whether it's something else, what we really talk about is where you find yourself after you've fallen off course. And then what we talk about is how to get back on course, but in a different way. We don't really talk about, getting back so that you can continue to follow that plan. For example, if you have suffered in a relationship where your partner has moved on, oftentimes getting back in that relationship is not an option. So if your plan was to stay married for the rest of your life, but your spouse didn't agree with that plan's done. So, people find themselves then in a place of crisis, and they don't know how to move forward because they've never envisioned the possibility that they might be in a different place. So what we teach is how to deal with the emotions that you're now going through, to be able to work through your situation, envision what you really want in your life, and then find a way to get it.
That right there. Yeah, that is, the fact that the outcome may not be the one that you originally envisioned, but it's still, you could get through the crisis and have an outcome that works, and maybe even better than the one that you originally had planned. It reminds me of an analogy, a story of when you plan, you're people that shooting, archery or bow and arrows, that you set up your target, you go back there, you practice, and you pull back the bow, you shoot the arrow, and you completely miss. And when some people that puts people into a crisis mode. And, what it seems like that you're able to do with it's the landing of the count is show people how to go to where the arrow is and then paint a new bullseye around that arrow, if that's what makes it necessary to get out of that crisis.
Right. So in my personal situation, one of the examples that I talk about is when I was fired from a very high-profile, very senior position with a very prominent company here in Canada. And I found myself feeling very ashamed, feeling very fearful, not really knowing where to turn. And I worked my way through that in a way similar to what we're teaching in the book, and became a very successful entrepreneur. I became more successful as an entrepreneur than I was as a very senior officer in this very large, very prominent corporation. So it wasn't a plan that I had for myself in my life. I never said to anyone, I want to be an entrepreneur. But finding myself in that circumstance, to your point, I found a new bullseye. I found another way to succeed, and it turned out to be a better way for me to succeed.
Right there, I think is one that there's probably a lot of people that are listening that, being fired or let go from a job is, right on point with, that brings up, it puts someone in crisis. It has, sometimes that shame attached to it, that isolation, that people have, and that's when they're struggling and emotionally they're not making the right decisions. What are some of the things that you see people doing that maybe not be the best thing for them to do, but maybe the what conventional logic tells them to do when they find themselves in a situation like that?
Well, oftentimes people don't really know where to turn, and sometimes people get into a state where they deny that they're feeling badly about their situation, and they become very superficial about how they're handling it. With my situation as an example, I tend to be very goal-oriented. So after I found myself without a job, and I started working through my way through to a solution, I started getting back on my feet by investing in other businesses. But the shame that I felt lasted for a much longer period of time. So on the surface, it appeared like I had dealt with it, but in reality, I really hadn't. And it took me a long time to come to grips to understand that if you want to land well, you have to deal with things from a practical perspective, i.e. find a solution, but you have to deal with things from an emotional perspective as well, which means stopping the blame, which means dealing with the shame, which means dealing with the fear and those other emotions that we feel. So I think sometimes what happens, especially if somebody's a type A personality or very goal-oriented, they'll deal with the immediate problem but not deal with the true internal feelings that they're going through.
Right. And right there where you're saying people dealing with that, I think is very important because so in a situation where someone loses their job, that whole taking control piece is, there's probably a good deal of that spent, there's nothing I can do, that they did this to me. They put me in this situation. They caused this. And when you say dealing with it, is there a point where people realize that, okay, this is what occurred, this is the circumstances, now it's time for me to take control of these circumstances and decide what happens next?
Yeah, I think that there isn't a time when people move from letting life happen to them to taking charge and making the decisions for themselves. Warren, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I believe one of the things that is regularly seen in this whole conversation is that as individuals move forward, they may be moving forward on a superficial level, but quite often these underlying issues continue. And what Margo and I spend a lot of time focusing on is that even if you get that next job, if internally there hasn't been growth, there isn't a sense of fulfillment. And one of the reasons that we have the parts of our title being, peace, prosperity, and happiness is that none of these can actually occur when there's still a whole lot of mental dialogue that is holding an individual back. So maybe they were fired, but 2 months later they have a new job, but internally they are still extremely unsatisfied and perhaps still have a whole lot of dialogue that continues about the previous position. And perhaps they're walking around holding pain or they're holding resentment. And we all know that individual that you haven't seen, let's say, in 3 to 6 months, and you'd like to know about what's happening in their lives, but all you get is a regurgitation of what's happened in the past year, rather than what's happening currently.
Yeah, I know, as an example, who was fired from his job and moved away. And it's been 3 years, and a mutual friend of ours said to me, he's coming into town for a visit, and he has not dealt with it. He hasn't gotten over, what he went through when he was let go. And, even though it appears that the person is successful, you can't enjoy your success unless you've dealt with it emotionally. And that's the case whether it's a relationship, whether it's work, whether it's something else that you've gone through. Whatever it might be, you've got to deal with it at the emotional level as well.
Yeah, in fact, I want to take that to the other side of this on the relationship to show how this just fits so perfectly in the same way that someone may lose a job that we talked about. Let's say a relationship that went sideways. Someone has been, or a relationship has been strained or been broken. And even though that person may have moved on or found another relationship, it sounds like what Warren was talking about, that they still may be holding on to perhaps that same fear or worry that, will this happen again? Where even though it seems that they moved on, maybe they haven't taken that control. And that's a very frightening aspect, to actually give up that security blanket of it's someone else's fault or the reason this happened was someone else, and take that over. And I know a big part of what you, the outcome of this book is that removal of the fear, that, the control. How is it that people can get past that when they accept that, okay, to get rid of that fear? That's a big part of it, the removal of the fear that this is going to happen again, or that, I got out of this by accident, and they may not have actually they may not have landed, even though they got out of that relationship. They still haven't hit that landing that your book really talks about.
Yeah, we talk about a concept called negative self-talk. And in the book, we refer to it as NST. And what we teach you is to identify that negative self-talk. And that's really what Warren's talking about when he says you're carrying around, this internal message. If you have not dealt with something emotionally, you may continue to be blaming yourself and criticizing yourself and speaking very negatively to yourself in a way that's actually quite destructive. So that even if you have been motivated by shame or fear to move forward, you haven't really dealt with your situation, and so you continue to speak negatively to yourself, and the messages you give to yourself are still very negative, to the point that even what you've built after your crisis, it could all still unravel because you haven't really dealt with it properly. And until you let go of that negative self-talk and start talking to yourself in a positive manner so that you can grow and you can move forward and learn from that experience, you never really do land and you never really overcome that crisis.
Yeah, and there's one thing I would add to that as well, if that's okay. It's just we also have a component of what we call hypnotic meditation. And it is rather simple, and so I'm sure there might be some of the audience that says, well, it's not always easy to just let go. And one of the things that's very important that we point out is that there is a process through meditation and through some of hypnosis as well, even self-hypnosis, it doesn't have to be with someone else, that we can begin to program new dialogue. We can, if there is something new that an individual wants to start thinking, the great thing about our mind is that we can program that. It just takes repetition. That the amount of, if you consistently use, and this goes back thousands of years, if you use a mantra, a small, short dialogue that you want to say about yourself, a new identity that you want to create, as long as that is repeated and meditated on regularly, it will begin to seep in. Because we are malleable. We can change. It takes time, but it is possible.
Right. Well, one thing that I would really want to hit before we have to go is something that a lot of people think that they are dealing with crisis or think that a solution's just going to land in their lap is the old standby of, time heals all wounds. Just give it time. And one of the things that I've learned from you and what you, to teach with this book is that can be actually a dangerous way of thinking. It could be dangerous to just let time, wait for time to heal that. Can you talk about that really quick here so we can understand that that's not the answer?
Well, the reason I brought that up is that there is a component of time that's required for healing, but when we sit back and expect either the universe or God or whatever it is to take this into somebody else's hands, what we will really want to see is we want to see individuals take this into their own hands. And that when you become an active partner in your own growth and your own life, that we don't have to sit back and just wait for time to heal. And often on a psychological level, sometimes during that waiting period, other behaviors can show up. So it's very important to address what's going on in your mind, address what's going on in your life, and be honest and forthcoming with yourself and perhaps some of your close friends and family members to say, I need help and I want to change. And our book is really designed to give those people actionable tools of, no, you don't have to wait it out. Yes, you can begin creating and changing and bringing forth the life that you desire.
And Jack, I would just add to that, sometimes what happens is we get stuck. And it could be that we suffered the crisis a long time ago, maybe even years ago. But because we haven't actually worked through that process, we're still somewhat stuck with that crisis lingering over us, even though it may appear that we've actually moved on. this book will help those readers. You don't have to be going through a crisis today. This could be something that happened to you in the past, and we help you deal with it so that you can overcome it and leave it behind once and for all.
Yeah, well, I think that right there is something that so many people feel. So many people, regardless of what the situation is, regardless of what the crisis is, and sometimes people may think the crisis, it's a big word, but really, people that live with a knot in their stomach, people that live with uncertainty, people that live with fear, people that feel that because things didn't go the way that they had planned, that now that they're off track, and I know that you use the phrase of free fall, and I think that is a great, I can just picture that. People feel that when they're in free fall, there's nothing for me to grab onto. I just wanted to call time out and figure this out. And you're saying, and I think that you actually have the solution for people to remove that uncertainty, remove that fear, that there is a way out of this, and that big sigh of relief when they do land and they realize I got through this. And the person that they become after they got through this is something that I think is huge in itself that we didn't really get to talk about, but I think it's one of the probably the biggest, one of the biggest side effects that people going through your book will find. This book really can change lives, and that's why I consider you an influencer, because you're influencing the people that read this book, but not just that, you're also influencing the people that are in the lives of the people that are having these issues, that are going through this book to find these answers. How can people find out more about this? How can they get a hold of this book?
Anyone can go to www.itsthelandingthatcounts.com. They can order the book there, and they are also welcome to a couple gifts that we are giving away, which is anyone that would like to become part of our network and our little society will receive 2 hypnosis / meditation downloads. And then we have also a 7-day mini course that will take individuals through the cursory levels of how they can move towards creating this landing that we hope everyone can achieve in their lives.
It's thelandingthatcounts.com. I would encourage every single person listening to this, because like I said, I'm not a betting man, but I bet that this can apply to you and to so many people around you that are big parts of your life. Margo Micallef, Warm Broad, I want to thank you so much for coming on Influencers Radio today. And I think that, going through this, it really is a testament and puts a spotlight on the fact that you are true influencers. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much. It was great being on.
Thank you, Jack.
All right, folks, check it out again. It's thelandingthatcounts.com. Until next time on Influencers Radio, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/influencersradio.